Sitting within the scorched sands of Venge, a region under near constant assault by the near ever-present Eye satellite, carving swaths of the landscape away in a torrent of fire and death to everything organic, sits a series of ancient and dilapidated labs. One such lab, deemed the Tower of Abuse, houses a horde of headless skeleton thralls that roam the wastes of Venge, attacking and silencing all those who find themselves unlucky enough to be caught in their path. And at the head of this broken band of brainless bandits sits two skeletons known aptly as the Voodoo brothers. Punk and Screamer the False, also known as the Voodoo brothers, likely named for their ability to raise corpses of skeletons into headless zombie-like puppets, a process closely associated to the real-life Haitian practice of voodoo, are comprised of a Screamer and P4 model of skeleton. Together they have taken and enthralled hundreds of skeletons over the last 1,000 years for seemingly unknown reasons. That is, until recently. You see, sitting in the uppermost level of the Tower of Abuse is a single, garbled, incoherent, and seemingly feral skeleton by the name of Agnu. Named after Chris Hunt's motorcycle, and as such, the headless attendant to President Nixon from the show Futurama, it is this seemingly random captive that allows us to paint a picture as to who the Voodoo brothers once were, who they have become, as well as the depressing fall from honor and civility to his violent and incoherent present that is the very origins of Agnu. Now, to start piecing together the origins of Agnu and the Voodoo brothers, we will examine Agnu himself, and I mean that quite literally. You see, Agnu's particular model of skeleton is that of a soldier bot, not to be confused with the similar but much weaker loghead variant. In fact, as far as I know, Agnu is the only SoldierBot recruit in the entirety of Kenshi. This is because the SoldierBot model of skeleton make up the bulk of Catlan's legion and police force in the Second Empire, most of whom are either still loyal to him, wandering the Ashlands, or were brutally enslaved as the once great ruler descended into madness. Another thing to consider is where Agnu might have come from prior to being locked up in the Tower of Abuse. A common mistake among lore masters of Kenshi is that Agnu is a member of the Airbots located in the northeastern corner of the Deadlands, due to the broken speech module leaving him presenting as if he were riddled with airs. But Agnu is garbed in a dark bluish-gray rag, as well as Dai's armor placed on him in the same color palette, a palette that is most closely associated with that of the Second Empire police force, whereas the Airbots wear a brighter green color, possibly one affiliated with the First Empire or some unknown group. With these two things taken into account, it can be surmised that Agnu was once a member of Catlan's Second Empire police force. But this in and of itself is not much of a find, as almost every skeleton was once a member of Catlan's empire. Well, as I stated briefly before, Agnu was named after Chris Hunt's motorcycle, which in turn was named after the headless body of Agnu from Futurama, due to its similar personality of loud growling and being impossible to control. This glimpse into his origins out of game starts to paint an interesting picture as to his origins on the moon of Kenshi. So now we know that Agnu was a member of Catlan's police force, and that nearly all of their soldier bots either remained fiercely loyal to Mad Catlan, or were beheaded and enthralled into easily controlled slaves. But what if a skeleton was too hard to control? Too strong-willed, and fought back too hard against the enthralling process? What if trying to enthrall this particular soldier was more trouble than it was worth, and instead he was tossed into a cage, where he was forced to sit until he either fell into madness from CPU bloat, or reset, and lose the strength and skills that he would need to fight back against his captors? But where did the Voodoo brothers and their story come in? Are they too related to Catlan and his empire? Well, dear viewers, it turns out that Ponk was very likely the skeleton who carried out the mass enthrallment of Catlan's legion, acting as the Thrallmaster in the final days of the Second Empire. And how did I come to such a conclusion? Well, the answer lies in his status as a P4 model skeleton. You see, throughout Kenshi, most of the high-ranking skeletons in Catlan's empire were that of the P4 model, including General Hat 12, General Zhang, the head of agriculture, and Mad Catlan himself. This fact, coupled with their increased science and crafting skills, as well as their more delicate heads, has led to speculation that these variants of skeleton were designed to be the leaders and commanders in their ranks, and moving into the Second Empire we can see that this theory continued to remain true. We also know that Catlan had a large number of his subordinates enthralled, but we never see a facility in the Ashlands that appears to be fit for such a purpose. In fact, we don't see a facility designed for enthralling skeletons anywhere other than the Tower of Abuse itself in the entirety of Kenshi, nor do we see the practice being used by any others. In fact, the only known thralls outside of those controlled by the Thrall Masters or Catlan's Legion are those taken from the Ashlands by the Armor King, so one can assume that the knowledge of the enthralling process is not widely known. We also know that it couldn't have been created by the First Empire, lest they would have enthralled them all to prevent the skeleton uprising and the subsequent collapse of the First Empire at their hands. As such, we can deduce that the process of enthralling was created by one of Catlan's high-ranking subordinates, likely a fellow P4 unit for the very reasons I've already discussed. The unit would act as the sole bearer of knowledge on the subject, carrying out the gruesome task at Catlan's disposal, taking the members of the Legion into a hidden, secluded area, ravaged by the remains of the First Extinction to enact the process in secret, away from the prying eyes of his citizens and potential threats until such a time when all would be loyal to Mad Catlan, and the supposed threats to his rule were expunged. However, when Catlan's crimes came to light, his empire gave up and rotted from the inside. The Thrallmaster Ponk would be left secluded and ostracized from the other skeletons for his role in Catlan's crime. Or perhaps his location was never disclosed, and he continued to serve his lord and enthrall the now supposed legionnaires of Catlan's forces for hundreds of years, until he began to go mad from CPU bloat, a topic which I explain in full detail in my Sadness of the Skeletons video, eventually succumbing to the emotional overload and obsession with his task of enthralling, and even confusing his own identity with Catlan himself, losing all sense of sanity and rationale until only Catlan's Thrall Master remained. But what of Screamer the False, assistant to Ponk? Well, his explanation is much more meta in origin. In the game files, there exists an entity known as General Screamer the True, a Mark II model of skeleton compared to that of the False's Mark I model. However, he was never added to the finished version of the game, but he was designed to sit next to Catlan in his seat of power as his most trusted right hand in general. This leads me to believe that Screamer the False was a Screamer model of skeleton taken and twisted by Ponk using his in-depth knowledge of skeleton programming and mental processes in his twisted attempt to create a mirror to General Screamer the True, as in his corrupted CPU state. He had begun to confuse himself with Catlan, trying to create a legion and an empire similar to that of the one he once served so faithfully, with himself acting as a mirror to the master he once served so faithfully. So, dear viewers, now that we have the details clear, allow me to spin you a tale of an empire's fall and the betrayal of those who served it so faithfully, as well as the one lone soldier who refused to bow even in the face of madness and eternity. Over a millennia ago, Catlan, hero and emperor of the Second Empire, began to deteriorate and collapse from within, having chosen to forego resetting his CPU to maintain his skills as a leader. He started to suffer from CPU bloat, causing madness and paranoia and obsession. After a series of rebellions, famine, human rights violations, and attacks from pirates along the border, he came to the conclusion that the enemy of his empire was that of free will itself, and in order to protect his people, and to protect his empire, and to protect his power, he would need to eliminate the threat of betrayal in its entirety. To this end, he turned to Ponk, a fiercely loyal and high-ranking member of his medical division who had discovered, through his repairs of skeleton soldiers, a method to remove their very sense of self and autonomy without killing them, making them mindless warriors incapable of refusal or betrayal. At Catlan's request, he would set up a workshop in Venge, a region that was avoided due to the presence of the Eye satellite burning all living things in its path. A perfect place away from the prying eyes of those who might try to stop him, and safe from any humans who might try to mount a rescue of the skeletons trapped inside. At first, Ponk would be sent damaged members of Catlan's forces under the guise of specialized medical repairs. However, eventually this would graduate to alleged upgrades and combat modifications to secretly spirit the skeleton soldiers away without raising suspicions. There they were caged, beaten, tortured, betrayed, and defiled, taken apart until none of their former self remained, only a headless husk ready to serve their lord Catlan. However, Agnu, a respected and strong-willed member of the Second Empire police force, began to grow suspicious of the disappearance of skeletons throughout the Legion. That, paired with the growing hypocritical behavior of his superiors towards the human populace, he would begin to independently investigate the matter, piecing together the clues and slowly unraveling the plot. However, before he could finish his search, he was discovered by his superiors and sent off to the Tower of Abuse to be reconditioned. There, he was to be enthralled and join the legion of zombies at Catlan's disposal. However, despite Ponk's best effort, Agnu could not be broken, and would fight back violently and with such ferocity that after several attempts, he was simply thrown into a cage, left to rot from the inside until either he was gripped with madness or forced to reset his CPU, causing him to no longer be able to fight back. To expedite this process, Ponk would eventually destroy his vocal module, leaving him unable to communicate, no longer able to even ease his torment with the sound of his own voice and accelerate the CPU burnout, as all of his thoughts would remain as such and build into aggravated emotional bloat, forcing him to eventually reset. However, as with all things, eventually the populace came to be aware of Catlan's betrayal, causing the vast majority of the remaining citizens to abandon the Empire. Ponk would be left in the Tower of Abuse, continuing to carry out his assignment, slowly but surely devolving into madness and obsession as his CPU bloated with unreleased emotions, eventually becoming a blind obsession with Catlan, as well as enthralling skeletons in an attempt to create a loyal and obedient legion, with himself becoming a strange and deluded version of the Lord he served so faithfully that he had committed such sin for, eventually even capturing and creating a protege to mirror that of his former lords. But despite the centuries passing, and Ponk continuing to hone and enthrall hundreds more skeletons as time went on, Agnu would continue to fight back from within the horrific walls of the Tower of Abuse. Believing, with all his will and his ideals in freedom, he showed no signs of deteriorating in both mind and strength. Even when he finally reset his CPU, reverting his skills back to basic values, he somehow retained a level of mental fortitude and physical strength that allowed him to continue to fight against being enthralled for nearly a millennia, all the way into the modern era, where he sits patiently, waiting for his freedom to be returned, as the only living example of a skeleton who was so strong-willed, so indomitable, that the Voodoo brothers have been unable to break him for over 1,000 years.